What is the biggest takeaway that you hope people walk away from this conversation with?
That it is okay to experiment with sort of dipping your toe outside of overachievement. That actually, if you look at your life and you look at the really memorable, most satisfying parts of your life over the last 10 years, it's very likely that it wasn't the gold star that you got at work or at school. It very likely is an experience that you had, a relationship that you fostered, care and connection between other people. And if overachievement gets in the way of that, we're at risk of not spending our time on this earth in the best way possible.
Welcome to the O Word, a podcast for overachievers by overachievers. I'm your host, Stephanie Lin. And if you are someone who always feels the need to push harder or tie your worth to your productivity, this episode is for you. Today, I'm joined by someone who I believe is one of the leading experts on this topic, Dr. Jen Douglas. She's incredible and an acclaimed psychologist with over 15 years of experience, including at Stanford Medicine. And today we are talking about the hidden cost of overachieving, from perfectionism and anxiety to burnout to chronic pressure and the fear of slowing down. Does that sound familiar to you? If you are still listening, I bet you it is. So you're going to learn why so many high performers struggle to rest, where those patterns come from, and how to pursue success in a way that's actually healthy and sustainable. So let's get right into it. Dr. Douglas, I'm so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. You know this topic's near and dear to my heart, so I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
How did you get involved in this line of work? What inspired you to really hone in on supporting people who grapple with perfectionism and overachievement?
I spent my time in psychology training. I was really drawn to learning how to treat disordered eating, actually in women. And I thought it was this beautiful intersection of mental health and sort of feminism, essentially, because, okay, here are these impossible standards that women are up against, and it's really destroying their health. It's an incredibly dangerous mental health disorder. And so that's where I started. And then I learned about, the level of impact of trauma on mental health. I got to know, and I got to treat all these beautifully complex clients who were up against so much. And what was always fascinating to me is whether I was treating anxiety or eating disorders or PTSD, is there was this underlying thread of perfectionism, of a desire to be enough, of a desire to protect oneself, to be safe, to be loved, to be accepted. And when I looked at that thread was not just in folks who were struggling with a mental health diagnosis. That was sort of a universal human experience, especially for women where there are impossibly high standards, especially in, the major metro areas where there's such a over focus on achievement and sort of clout and these things.
Mm,
And that's where it really became my mission in life to undo, overachievement and perfectionism, especially in women, because
yeah.
we've seen it morph, over the past 80 years or so, what perfect looked like. But it's always
Hmm.
been there. And it's always been this, silent water that we swim in and we don't even notice. And so giving
Hmm.
it a name allows us to see, oh, this is where my stress is coming from. And this is how I fight back against an impossible expectation.
I think it would be helpful to start out from the root cause of all this. So
Mm.
where would you say overachieving begins, and how is it different from just being ambitious or hardworking?
Absolutely. So ambitious and hardworking, totally fine. Everything is fine in the appropriate dosage. But when we move into overachievement, or I talk a lot about perfectionism, we are engaging in those behaviors because we are seeking some type of safety. So the safety of being accepted, the safety of being completely free of any criticism, the safety of being loved. And that can start at any point in the life cycle. But we often find that chronic overachievers, this begins very, very young.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit more. So why does it start often from a very young age for a lot of people?
These things are both nature and nurture, and both things can be ingrained from a very, very early age. So we know that neurobiology can make us more vulnerable to difficulties like anxiety, for instance, which is highly related to overachievement and
Hmm.
perfectionism. Now, that said, we also have data about epigenetics, meaning how our DNA gets expressed from one generation of a family to another. And in many cases, you will actually find that if there were stressors in previous generations, for instance, hard immigration stories, if we experienced war, famine, things like that in our family
Mhm.
history, then the offspring and actually even grandchildren, and we're finding great grandchildren of people who have those challenges, will actually eject from the womb with an automatic predisposition to anxiety and pressure in a
Wow.
different way than those who never experienced that in their family lineage.
That's incredible. So it would you say it's passed down through like genetically? Is that what I'm hearing? Or
Yes. So the way our DNA works is that we all have DNA with different genes, but our genes are expressed differently in different situations and circumstances. So your and my DNA is actually turning on and off right now during this conversation. We are
oh
actually
wow.
expressing our DNA in different ways.
Oh cool.
And so it's adaptive. It's very, very cool. And so if I am born in a situation of abundance and safety, and I have nurturing parents and a nurturing community, my DNA is going to interpret my situation as safe and operate in the world with a fundamental understanding of safety. If I'm born into a war torn or sort of food scarce type situation, my DNA is actually designed where it can express in such a way it will fight for survival. And
Mhm.
so we can actually, our brains are adapted to thrive even in challenging situations. So this isn't a bad thing, but when our brains come out sort of, ready for the worst case scenario, then we start to operate at this very, very high octane as
Yeah.
if we're always in the worst case scenario when actually we just got an email from our boss and it's not actually life or death.
So true. So true. Yes, I like that you brought up that example. Are there certain personality types um that are more prone to overachievement?
Certain behaviors, when we lean on them too much, again, if the dosage is too high, then we get into this overachieving realm. And personality traits are, again, a combination of nature and nurture. So
Mhm.
we have this fundamental predisposition through our neurobiology or even our epigenetics, but then we also are products of our environment. And so, for instance, if we go to a school that is very focused on high achievement, if we are from a family that really values high achievement, those characteristics are actually purposefully fostered. Because if you ask the random person on the street, overachievement isn't a bad thing. It's only those of us who've lived it for a couple decades who see the downsides.
I think a lot of times high achievers don't even realize they're operating from a place of anxiety. A lot of it is just become second nature almost. So,
Mhm.
what does that look like in real life for someone who may
Mhm.
not even be aware of it?
It's sort of like the sort of old story about the frog in water, where if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water to try and make frog legs, that they jump right out. But
Yeah.
if you put the frog in cold water and slowly turn the temperature up, they do not notice. And
Hmm.
the high achievers, the perfectionists, they sort of acclimate to this very high level of stress. And one thing that you'll notice comes up over and over again is someone will say, "Oh, well, it's just a hard week. Let me just get through this week and then it'll be better. Then I'll calm down. Then I can rest." And that's been happening for like 15 years, usually. It's a tough way to live and it's very normalized.
What is the emotional cost when somebody is constantly on perfectionist overachieving mode?
Well, the first thing you lose is you lose a lot of emotional vulnerability and intimacy. So
Mhm.
if someone's always stuck in this kind of high octane achievement mode, it's very hard for them to slow down. It's very hard for them to be present. It can even be hard for them to perspective take over how that approach to life might be affecting their loved ones. And so you can sort of see the cracks form even in the most well-meaning people because operating at 110%, say at work or in parenting or, in whatever way we want to, overachieve, inevitably has these downstream effects. What makes perfectionism maladaptive is when we essentially apply it universally in our life. So this is when prioritization is sort of out the window. We want to be perfect across the board on every single obligation we may have, or even our hobbies. Perfectionism can take over hobbies and actually pull joy out of them.
Mhm.
And so it hinders people because when you're under that amount of pressure, there's actually something called the Yerkes-Dobbs curve, and pressure can actually make us perform better up to a point. And then we become a bit paralyzed and our our performance actually goes down based on pressure. So you
Mm.
see folks who are caught in this perfectionist cycle, they might be rewarded for it early on and they're getting all these accolades and they're doing so well, they get promoted. And then there's so much pressure to be perfect that they actually find that they can't even write the email or make the speech or execute a decision at work because they're just paralyzed by the idea of doing it imperfectly.
For people who have built their entire identity around achievement,
Right.
how hard is it to change these patterns that you've been describing here?
It's difficult to change, but it's not as difficult when the person really sees the motivation for why they would want to live life differently.
Mhm.
So when people come to my office, they have reached a breaking point where it's really not working anymore. And they usually don't identify it as overachievement. They identify it as anxiety or depression or burnout, which is fine. But when we get at the core of sort of this enmeshment between identity and achievement, that's what's causing those difficulties. And when someone is really willing to pull those apart and leave achievement where it belongs, because achievement, again, can be a healthy part of our lives,
Mhm.
then they're willing to, we call it exposure therapy, they're willing to expose themselves to circumstances where they are not perfect. And then you actually see a lot of change pretty quickly once someone's willing to do that work.
What is your advice then to somebody who's they're just used to being great all the time, and then
hmm
perhaps they've tied their entire identity to what they do for work, and then all of a
hmm
sudden all the things that they have been doing that have gotten to them to that point just isn't working anymore.
Absolutely. And people can reach this point for a myriad of different reasons. Either it's not working for them, it's harming their relationships. I even work with a lot of folks who are transitioning into retirement. Maybe
Mm.
they did everything right and they, sold the billion-dollar company at 35, or they're
Yeah.
retiring at 65. And suddenly, again, you don't have that rubric for am I doing well based on
Mm.
achievement.
Mhm.
And so one of my favorite practices to start with, because I try and start with the fun stuff, not the scary stuff as best I can.
Yeah. It's helpful.
And so it starts small. It's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah.
But many high achievers actually get in this habit of narrowing their life. And and when I say that, I mean that they only participate in activities where they know that they could do things perfectly.
Mm. Mhm.
So they're not going to put themselves out there and say ballroom dance or, learn how to paint
Uh-huh.
or, get up at an open mic and sing.
Mhm.
And so what I ask folks to do is actually play around with doing things that are very low stakes, but that they're inevitably not going to do perfectly.
Mhm. Mhm. 'Cause what does that condition the brain to do?
It shows the brain that it is not scary to have an experience where you're not the best in the room.
Okay.
Like it's
Yeah.
actually safe if I go to a pottery class and just make garbage. And
It's
it's
okay.
not only
Yeah.
safe, it's
Uh-huh.
fun and I might enjoy it. And there's value to things outside of achievement. That's what we're trying to teach the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I've spoken with so many just incredible, high achieving people, and it's interesting because a thing that comes up sometimes is people sometimes are afraid to stop pushing themselves constantly because they're worried they're going to lose their edge. I mean, have
Yes.
you heard that yourself? And can somebody lose their edge if they decide to explore outside of, their typical routine for a little bit or just take a
Mhm.
break?
Yeah. I hear that concern expressed about twice a week. Generally in my practice, it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
It's a very
Okay.
fundamental fear.
Uh-huh.
And what I've seen over and over and over again is that when people let go of that rigidity, because when we're stuck in sort of a need for overachievement and perfectionism, there's an idea of one way to do things, and we play it very safe. And so, the overachiever is going to wait in the team meeting, until their idea is absolutely perfectly curated before they share it.
Mhm.
And so many folks actually find themselves sort of pigeonholed or boxed in, and they find a ceiling to their career to some extent.
Hmm.
Whereas once we start to break up a little bit of this perfectionism and create a bit more flexibility, I actually see folks who become much more creative. They're willing to put themselves out there. They're willing to take up more space. And this intersects with, identity and whether or not, someone is a 6'4" white guy, trying to make space in a room or not.
Mhm.
And when you see folks moving beyond that sort of very lockstep rubric of what overachievement gives us as an option, people actually often do much better professionally. It's
Hmm.
amazing.
Do you feel like they suddenly discover that by allowing themselves to rest, they suddenly create some more headspace and creativity, room for creativity, that sort of thing?
Yes, there's more headspace. There's more creativity also because if you're not stuck in fight or flight mode all the time, then your brain is actually going literally different parts of your brain get activated and that you actually experience more creativity in your day-to-day life. You're also more willing to actually put your ideas out there even if they haven't been trialed and haven't been marked as, deemed perfect yet. And that's where you see the most change really happen.
Why is the idea of rest
Yes.
so uncomfortable for people who are very high performers? In fact, they might even feel guilty about not doing
Oh,
enough.
yes. Yes, yes. Well, there's both neurobiology here, and then there's also sort of our cultural understandings of rest. So, in particular for women, I talk about this. If you've never seen the women in your life rest,
Mhm,
then you don't have a model for what that looks like. And I always give the example of, at the big sort of events, holidays and things like that, where the women constantly moving around and never sat down because they were
mhm,
serving all of these other people. And that's not just within the home, it's certainly in work situations as well, where, somebody's sort of full tilt all the time and they never take a step back. They just go on to the next project. There's no kind of slowing down and celebrating our wins. It's just next goal, next goal, next goal.
mhm.
So our socialization plays a part of it. But the other thing is that when we again hit that suboptimal stress point that's really hurting us, our brain goes into something called fight, flight, or freeze mode. And this is where our whole physiology is reacting in a way where we feel unsafe. So if I'm
Mhm,
very, very scared about my presentation tomorrow to the executive board, I might find myself frozen in front of my computer, at 1 a.m. trying to change my slides, but I can't make a decision. That's what that looks
mhm.
like. And so when our physiology is that activated, it actually makes it difficult for us to slow down and rest. You even see elevated heart rate throughout the day and even overnight for people. Even when they are sleeping, they're at a higher resting heart rate when there's that much
Wow.
stress.
So it
Yeah.
sounds like so much of overachieving really is about this idea of being in control of a situation.
That is the theory. That is what perfectionism is trying to tell us, that if we just work hard enough, we can control sort of our destiny and avoid any kind of negative emotion.
Mhm, mhm. But, as life will also show us, a lot of times we can't be in control of everything.
Yeah, if it was that easy, it'd be great. Like, if it worked, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Why is it that, perfectionists seem to have this terrifying, crippling fear of failure?
Well, sometimes it's because they've had a negative experience in the past that they don't want to repeat. So, for instance, I've had folks where they have gotten laid off or fired from a job and they felt like, oh, if I just had done everything at 110%, this wouldn't have happened. And I have to be perfect in my next job to make sure that doesn't happen. And so that's one pathway. The other pathway is, again, this model of perfectionism being present from a very young age. When people start high achieving early, and they may start high achieving early because that's a huge family value that's imparted to them. They may be in a family where maybe there's some tension or chaos. There might be, divorce and economic stress, things like that. Achievement is often a means of escape or a means of calming the overall situation of the household. So this is the kid where the parents are having a tense dinner and they say, "Oh, look, I got an A on my spelling test." And then the fighting stops and they say, "Oh, good job, little
Mm,
Timmy, you did that." And sort of
mhm,
they're positively reinforced in that way. But
mhm,
many perfectionists truly, especially if the family culture is around high achievement, many perfectionists actually never have had the experience of failure.
mhm.
And when we've never experienced something, it becomes exponentially more frightening.
How can people start separating their self-worth from their achievements?
Yeah, we talk about this as sort of widening the lens on our life. It's very easy, especially, in today's culture. You and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, certain hubs where this is even more intense than other areas of the country. So it's very easy to get caught in the job sphere of this and the professional sphere because we're literally given a salary or our business is making X amount of money or we're given a title. And it's very
Mhm,
similar to grades in school. Like you're getting an A or you're getting a B or you're getting a C. And so it's very easy to kind of hang our hat on that hierarchy. And
mhm,
instead, we want to sort of zoom out. And I often have people do an exercise. We call it the 80th birthday. So when you think about your 80th birthday party and people toasting you and celebrating you, are you going to be thinking about, yeah, this was my title when I was 43 years old and I made this much money and there was this much in my 401k?
uh-huh,
Or are you going to think about how deep were my relationships? Was I there for people? Did I have a deep spiritual practice or participation in community? Sort of what's going to matter when we really zoom out?
mhm,
And for many of us in the modern day world, even if those are our values and our desires, we might not be giving as much time or energy to those things in our everyday life because life is busy.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm,
so, how we work in coaching and even in therapy is that we actually start to align our behavior with the values that we have once we zoom out and think about our life in this more holistic way. We want people to know that about themselves fundamentally and not depend on getting the biggest bonus in the office to give them that gold star and make them feel truly worthy. And so
mhm,
many folks, go back to things that are very important to them that might have been lost for 10, 20 plus years, including things like taking care of their body, exercising, spending time outdoors. So many
yeah,
people move to the Bay because it's so beautiful here, and then they realize they haven't gone on a hike in 3 years.
yeah,
What actually does improve happiness are things like living our values, being present, so learning how to be mindful in the moment, long term and short term too, but relationships and connections with other people. So again, it's very much focused on our experience and what is important to us rather than the external validation piece. So they may get that same satisfaction and more camaraderie through involvement in community volunteering, through joining an intramural soccer team, through being involved in a religious or spiritual organization, through teaching kids how to read on a Thursday afternoon. Like you start to live in what we call values-based living, then you get a lot of that fear drops away because we get this confidence from living from our own values rather than seeking this external validation.
What does a more sustainable version of success look like to you?
Mhm. It is expertly deployed perfectionism or high achievement. So when we choose where we focus our energy with absolute laser precision. So people are always scared when I say, oh, well, we're going to manage your overachievement or we're going to manage your perfectionism. And they think, oh, I'm going to make them be mediocre sort of across the board in their life. And like, I don't know, sit around and eat junk food and watch TV all day. And that is actually not what we do. What
Mm,
we do is we decide on the things that are going to be very effective for them in their life to put a lot of their energy in, but then to be sort of ruthless in what we pull perfectionism away from because it's not actually helping them and it's an over reliance on that overwork.
Can you provide some examples for someone who is listening there right now and they're like, I would love a roadmap for
Yes.
how to, incorporate this into my life.
For instance, if someone is trying to, say we have a lawyer, for instance. So if they're trying to make all of their billables, they're trying to make partner, they are also trying to coach their kids' little league and, volunteer, in their community. And they're also trying to, visit their mother, in the nursing home 3 times a week and all these things. They're going to 150% burnout. It's literally not possible to do all of those things.
Mhm.
And so we there are obviously states where certain things are needed, like certain chapters in our life where certain things are needed. So if somebody is trying to make partner and they're working 60-hour weeks because they have to make their billables, then we can't augment that. Okay. but maybe they don't coach the little league. Maybe they make it to the games, but they don't need to do all the things. Maybe mom can understand if they come twice a week and they bring takeout instead of a home cooked meal kind of thing. Like, we want to lower the bar on things that are based on our presence, where we can show up and be present rather than focus on our performance in those states.
Curious to know too, just what the guidance is to young people nowadays too, who are under so much pressure with the social media stuff and the constant comparison.
Yeah. Well, and there's this really unfortunate inverse relationship between our mental health and how much time we spend on our screens engaged in social media.
Mhm.
And it's not because of the social media where you're, following your friends and seeing what they're up to. It's about seeing celebrities and plastic surgery and all of these things, like all these incredibly high bars for what perfection is, and not even plastic surgery, can just be filters. Doesn't even have to be the real person, but we're
Mhm.
presented this falsely perfect idea of what it is.
Mhm.
So I'm very big on social media boundaries. You don't have to be a monk about it. Like, you can, have TikTok and be engaged in those things. But it's very important to counterbalance it with the real world. And so one exercise that I borrow from the eating disorder therapist sort of side of my profession is, I actually have folks, when they're feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't look like every Instagram model that's coming across my feed. I actually have people sit at a cafe and just look at every third person who goes by
Hmm.
and just see what, like, real people look like. Um, because
Yeah.
when we get what a
What a
novel idea, right?
concept. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And they're not holding $30,000 purses, and they're
Yeah.
not, like they didn't come back, from the latest and greatest, beauty thing.
Yeah.
And it really is almost jarring when you're so used to seeing this perfect model of what people look like. You get no diversity in body size, you get no diversity in age, you get no diversity of race, class, ethnicity, all these things.
Mhm.
And then you go out into the real world and you see real people, and you start to notice that you see beauty and value and importance outside of this caricature of, whatever Kardashian is the most popular of the week.
What is something you wish more high achievers understood about themselves?
That they're valuable outside of their achievements. That there are people who love them just as much.
What is the biggest takeaway that you hope people walk away from this conversation with?
That it is okay to experiment with sort of dipping your toe outside of overachievement. That actually, if you look at your life and you look at the really memorable, most satisfying parts of your life over the last 10 years, it's very likely that it wasn't the gold star that you got at work or at school. It very likely is an experience that you had, a relationship that you fostered, care and connection between other people. And if overachievement gets in the way of that, we're at risk of not spending our time on this earth in the best way possible.
So it is safe to put the phone down and stop working for just a second here?
Yes, we can put the phone down and have dinner with our loved ones. That is allowed and even encouraged.
Dr. Jen Douglas, thank you so much for this conversation. If this episode resonated with you, please do send it to someone else who may need to hear it. I'm Stephanie Lin, and we'll see you next time.